Hello, everyone. Today is June 16th, and welcome to today's Dynamic Dialogue. We're going to talk about managing supplier performance today, and we're going to specifically look at what's different between recovery and prior to recovery, and maybe even into the new normal. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in. This is our weekly dynamic dialogue. This is open to supply chain professionals, anyone interested in supply chain activities. The topics are flexible. We take suggestions and requests. It's a forum for sharing thoughts, ideas, challenges you may be experiencing. I do a short presentation and we have an open forum. We keep it to under an hour. And the link that you use today is good for all the sessions through June. So in July, we're going to start a paid subscription, so make sure that you sign up today for that. If you sign up today or if you sign up soon, you'll get a 15% discount if you use the discount code Early Bird. So we're going to talk about supplier performance. So this is a quote from Eli Goldratt, who wrote both The Goal and The Race, which are easy to read books. If you haven't read those, you should pick them up at the library, pick them up from ebooks. Very easy to read, but they're very good about explaining different concepts in supply chain, in manufacturing. And so very, very interesting books, very fun to read, but also very poignant. So he says, "Tell me how you will measure me, and then I will tell you how I will behave. If you measure me in an illogical way, then don't complain about illogical behavior." So this is very powerful because this is what we do as individuals, as humans. Your children will display this. Tell your children how you're going to measure that, and then that's how they're going to behave. And if you try to do something illogical in measuring, then you're going to get illogical behavior. We do that, as people, and we do that as organizations. So when you're looking at suppliers, if you're measuring performance, make sure you are clear about how you're measuring them and make sure that they're in alignment with that, or you might have some very interesting results. A couple other things. Lord Kelvin, who was a physicist and engineer a long time ago, but who has a lot of legacy, even more than a century after his death, including the Kelvin scale, which we use for temperatures. He did a lot of mathematical analysis of electricity. He worked on the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which if you don't know those, you can look those up. They have a lot to do with entropy. And the first law is about matter cannot be made, it just is converted or transformed. He's an inventor. And he said originally, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. This has been ascribed to a lot of different people, but the research I did says Lord Kelvin came up with this in the first place. So if you can't measure it, you're not going to be able to improve it. And to measure is to know. So when you are looking at supplier performance, if you're just going off the latest things you remember, if you don't have a tracking system, metrics, if you're not measuring that performance, then you don't really know, they don't really know, and you're not going to be very well in tune. So you want to make sure that you measure performance and you have a consistent way to measure that. You apply the same standards over and over so that you can get improved results. So key performance indicators is a term that we use a lot. You can look up key performance indicators, you can look up metrics, you can look up measures. Some people will give you 3 different definitions for those. I tend to use those interchangeably. As I said, some people don't agree with that, but I think for general practice, it's good to have some kind of measure that gives you a metric that also indicates performance. So what we're looking for in key performance indicators is to establish a baseline of your current performance. The first thing you need to know is, where are you? Then you want to look at measures that demonstrate the organization's effectiveness in achieving the goals. So you want to be able to measure your progress to that goal. If you don't have a baseline on your performance and you don't have a goal, it doesn't much matter. So you want to make sure that you have some goals, but you need to set those goals after you have the baseline so you know where you're starting from, so you know whether your goal is going to be achievable or not. You'll read a lot about SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So you want goals that are reasonable to make. If you are at 5% of your sales goal and you want to be at 100% of your sales goal by next week, that's probably not really a reasonable goal. It is time-based and it is specific, but it may not really be something that is achievable from where you are. So you want to make sure that you've got some way to make that progress and make that goal, see that goal realized, or at least track progress to that. So you get a baseline and you get your measures in place. You want to track over time to monitor the progress toward that goal and to see what you do. If you have a statistical process control chart, you're tracking over time to see if the variance changes significantly over time. So you may not have a goal except to stay in control, which is a goal, but you track it over time to see, are you getting better? Are you getting worse? What the change is. If you just take any metric at any point in time, it may be good, it may be awful. You don't really know unless you compare it back to your baseline and track it over time to see, are you actually getting better? So you want to look at, are you declining? Are you improving? What direction are you going? Compare it to the previous performance, compare it to your goals, or compare to industry standards. Some companies use metrics like DPPM, and they look at industry standards. They track to see if they're getting better or worse, but the specific goal really is more tied to, are we at or better than industry standards? All of these KPIs, all of these measures can vary from company to company. They're not necessarily consistent from company to company, and they don't have to be. You need to find things that work for your company and your organization. And they also vary widely across industries. So different industries track different things, different processes. For instance, a sheet metal shop is going to track different things than a plastic part shop versus a PCB or PCA shop. So if you're making printed circuit boards, you're going to track different things than a machine shop. And that's fine, and that should be normal. We want to look at these because risk is such a big deal in our world today. A 2018 Deloitte survey of more than 500 procurement officers showed that managing this risk is a priority for more than half of the companies. And I can't believe that it's not like 90% of companies want to manage risk. But yet only 65% report having poor supply chain transparency, and only 6% are leading digital transformation that can address the problem. So of the 500 companies, over half want to reduce the risk, but over half, 65%, say they don't have the transparency they want in their supply chain, which means they're not getting good handles on what their performance of their suppliers are. And only 6% actually have initiatives that are trying to address that. So it's very important. And companies talk a lot about it, but they don't know how to do it, and they don't necessarily implement what they're talking about. So there are several aspects of performance that you can include. Some of them are pretty standard. Delivery, quality, and cost. We talk about those a lot. I add in responsiveness because I think that's important. Inventory management. Now, during this pandemic, before and after, inventory management is more important than ever before. And it's really one of the key ways that you should be looking at your suppliers. Also, flexibility. How flexible, how agile are they? How much can they change? How quickly? Because they need to change to support you, because your customers are asking the same thing of you, to be flexible. And finally, assurance of supply. This is an area where we usually talk about that as an internal metric. Are we making sure we have what we need? But in the light of the pandemic, I say we really need to look at suppliers and understand how they're managing their assurance of supply, not only within their own walls, but with their tier 2 and with our tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. So what are they doing with their suppliers? Delivery, we'll go through these a little bit in detail, each one of these. So delivery requirement is to be on time. That's a very very easy to say statement, and everybody says, oh yeah, on-time delivery. But it's hard to measure. This is one of the really hard, I think, metrics to measure, because there's so many factors involved. There's the shipping date, there's the transportation company that actually does the moving from the supplier to the customer. There's all of the factors in between. There's weather, there's strikes, there's all of the different modes of transportation that can be involved. If you think about things that start from a factory in inland China, they have to get on a truck to go to the port. From the port, they get on a boat. From the boat, they come to a port here, say maybe Long Beach or LA. After that, they get off. They may get on a plane. They may get on a rail car. They may get on another truck from there. They may go to a distribution center. They may go direct to the customer. There's so many different pieces of that it's really hard to say what's on time and what's not, because it may have left your supplier on time, but it may not arrive at your dock in the right area. So you want to look at how you're going to measure that. This is important that you share this information with your suppliers and have them agree as to how you're going to actually measure these, because there's so many different ways that it can be measured and so many different things that can happen. So inventory transactions, sometimes the delivery is considered when it hits the dock, sometimes not until it's actually transacted into inventory, which should be shortly after it hits the dock, but depending on what your factory situation is, it could be days later, or it could be over the weekend, or it could be any number of things that hinder that. Sometimes you have incoming inspection, and sometimes it has to go through that before it can be considered delivered and accepted. And then you want to also look at the condition. So did it come in the package, and did it come packaged correctly with the right documentation? Is the condition usable, or is it all beat up? If you ask for pallets, did it come in pallets or did it come loose? If you ask for packages of 100, did it come in packages of 500, or did it come in packages of 1 each? Or if you ask for packages of 10, did it come in a bulk box with 100 or 1,500 pieces in it? So you have to look at all of those things. During recovery, we want to look at some other things. We want to look at how well companies and suppliers especially are able to forecast the dates that they're going to ship, the quantities that they're going to ship, and then their accuracy for doing so. So it's not enough now to just say, oh yes, the ship date is this. Can they actually tell you ahead of time? So many companies are waiting on parts. There's shortages. So many companies have parts in queue and have asked for parts to be held so that they don't want all of those at once. Is your supplier able to really forecast the dates that they ship, the quantities that they're going to ship, and then are they hitting those consistently? If they are, and they're still subject to things like the reduced air freight from Asia, or even domestic, so then all those things come into play. But you want to make sure that your supplier is communicating with you on what they're doing, that they're able to forecast and commit and actually execute to their own plans. Looking for certificates of conformance. This is standard and routine, but now more than ever, you want to make sure your quality is there for your parts. Because with transportation so iffy and sketchy, you don't want to have to send things back. It's not as easy now to say to suppliers, get on a plane and come fix this problem. It's so many things make this more complicated. So you really want to make sure that the parts you're receiving are good. So those certificates of conformance need to be there. They need to be accurate, fully comprehensive, and they need to be correct. So that's another thing to look for, to make sure you don't have problems, because right now solving problems costs a lot more time and a lot more money to a company than it did pre the pandemic. Again, packaging documentation is very important. Nowadays, companies are slow to ramp back up, so they may not be able to ship full orders. The customer may request partial orders. Sometimes that is harder to package, harder to manage. The freight cost can be higher because you're sending 3 packages to get the full delivery, or 3 deliveries to get the full order, versus just at one time. But so the packaging is very, very important. As always, the documentation is important. So suppliers have to be good at doing those kinds of things. And then you also want suppliers to be able to expedite shipping when you need extra parts, or to delay shipping and hold parts for you if you have extra inventory, too much inventory. You're trying to burn through some of the inventory that came in when you first had a slowdown due to the pandemic. So there's so many different things in play here. You really want your suppliers to be able to help manage the delivery and make sure that you're setting the right requirements for your suppliers. Then you want to look at quality. So quality is a very important area, and it's one of those things that it just gets more and more important as we go on. Quality means that your purchased items meet the specifications, the dimensions, the functionality, the performance, the reliability, that they comply with all of the issues that you have, all of the specifications that you have. So this is where a lot of time, the money, the quality all coalesce in one area. So typical measures, you're looking at defects, scrap, rework, either things that happen in your line or as a result of the incoming inspection findings that you might have. So in this area, I'm talking about any quality issues related to a supplier, not inherent in your own company's production, but really that can be tied back to suppliers. So typically we look at complaints. So we look at returns from customers. Warranty issues come into that. We always look at that to measure the quality. We look at the rejections that you have on the line. How many incoming lots are rejected? How many things have to be returned? Supplier corrective action requests, SCARs. So how many of those are written? How many of those are responded to, and how quickly are they responded to and resolved? And then how complete is that? We always talk about root cause analysis. We want to find the root cause analysis, and we want to put a permanent solution in. We want to fix that so it doesn't recur. But it's important to measure that. Always has been, always will be. Did they complete that within the time that you as a customer felt was reasonable, and do they have an adequate root cause analysis? You look at things like acceptance rate, the number of lots that you accept, the number of pieces. Sometimes companies count the numbers of lots rejected or the number of lots with problems versus the number received for that period of time, say in a month. For instance, if you have one lot received and one lot rejected, that's not very good. But if you received 50 lots from them and had one rejected, that's not good, but the scale is much different and the impact may be a lot different. So you want to understand how you're going to measure that, understand what you're receiving and how often that is and how you can measure that. And then disruptions of any kind that relate to a supplier. Again, those often fall in the aforementioned categories like scrap, rework, stopping to check to make sure that the part is right. Looking for corrective actions after the fact that you have a disruption. So what's the problem with the part? Is it something that the supplier should have caught and should not have shipped to you? Or is it something that might have happened either in your plant or maybe during shipping? In recovery, we want to look at a couple other things. The root cause analysis and the SCAR responses are more important than ever. Like I said before, companies don't have time right now and don't have the ability to do things that they've done before with quickly sending parts back to the supplier or even getting replacement lots. And they can't do something which I've done many times as a customer, which is call the supplier and say, I got a problem. These parts need to be sorted. I want you to put somebody on a plane and be here tomorrow to go sort these, do the rework, take them back with you, fix them, and maybe bring me some new parts at the same time. So if you can't come tomorrow, then I want you here the day after. Now that's not really a reasonable thing. People don't want to travel, and people that don't mind traveling may not be welcome in a factory. Many factories I know are really limiting or eliminating guests and non-employee type people coming in because they don't want to risk their own employees with being contaminated by outside sources that may or may not be carriers of the COVID. But it's also important now because if you have a problem with the supplier, you really need them to make sure that they're checking with their tier 2 and even the tier 3 suppliers. So they need to know their suppliers and they need to know their suppliers' suppliers. Companies are looking at not only top tier suppliers, the ones they're buying from, but 2 and 3 layers down, suppliers need to be doing the same thing. So those corrective action responses may include information from and about those tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers of yours, and that needs to be included in there and that needs to be managed. And now as we know, the global supply chains are so big and so spread out that it may be difficult to get some of these suppliers online to figure out what's going on and figure out how you can fix it. So it's very, very important that you're looking at this and measuring this and tracking this and giving feedback on that. You want to look to see, are you seeing increases in defects from a supplier or on a particular part? Are you seeing increases in the number of disruptions from that supplier? There's a lot of things that can be happening. Suppliers can have done furloughs or layoffs, and they may have a different workforce that doesn't have all the skills and doesn't know the processes as well. And so you may have new people building your parts, and you might not have the right people there to be able to fix those or turn that around quickly. So you need to look for signals like that. You also need to look for continued compliance to both the requirements before COVID and your new requirements. There may be new requirements in packaging and handling, making sure that things are packaged maybe to limit the exposure and to make sure that you're not passing anything on from a supplier's factory to your factory in terms of anything that might have COVID-related germs or anything on it. There's a lot of discussion about how long the virus lives, how easy it is to transfer things from surfaces, but you want to make sure that your suppliers are doing the right things to manage their piece of the work so that they're not sending you more problems. This is especially true when you're working with food or medical issues, because we're seeing a lot of challenges in those areas. And you need to understand it's not unusual for manufacturers to work with thousands or tens of thousands of suppliers when you look at the number of companies you buy from and then their tier 2 and the tier 3 suppliers. So you have way more suppliers in your supply chain than you probably thought about very often before we heard of the coronavirus. So something as simple as a loaf of bread can have ingredients that come from half a dozen different countries. So understanding where those countries are, what they're contributing to your products, and what's going on in those countries can make a big difference to you and to your company. So now cost. Always we look at cost reductions. I don't know any organization that doesn't in some way, shape, or form look year to year for cost reductions. Sometimes they look for total cost of ownership reductions more than just a price reduction, but it's often a price reduction. You're also looking for contract compliance and some price stability. So sometimes you have contracts that allow for a price increase year over year, or sometimes they mandate a price reduction year over year. So what you're looking for generally is price stability in this area. Are you meeting the contractual requirements, and do you have something that you can project and manage the cost? So typical measures in this area include the prices that you pay, the total cost of ownership, which includes not only the price you pay, but things like freight, the cost of quality. Are you having rejects? Are you having scrap and rework that costs you money, or having to return things? Storage of parts. Are you having to carry a lot of inventory? And then overhead and profit. So what's your overhead, what's your profit, or what is your supplier's overhead and profit that goes into that total price paid and total cost of ownership? And then the cost of quality, as we said before, scrap, rework, warranty cost, cost of returns, all of that. During recovery, we want to expand that a little bit. We want to look at price fluctuations that result from COVID. Many companies have talked about prices going up. A few companies and a few commodities have actually seen price reductions in those areas, which is a good thing, but then you actually wonder, is that sustainable? And then you want to look for things like gouging. If you find that your supplier has been gouging anyone, maybe not you as a customer, but other customers, that is a big red flag, and you need to understand how you're going to deal with a situation like that. That is not the kind of supplier that I want to be dealing with on a regular basis. So if that's an emergency supplier that I found because I needed something and couldn't get it from my regular supplier, then that says I'm going to shut that down and not go back there. If it's a supplier, a legacy supplier, you may say, I no longer want to deal with this supplier, and I'm going to make plans to reduce my business or eliminate my business with that supplier. But that's a good thing to look for in terms of cost. The cost of quality increases, you want to look for that. Again, if you're having increases in disruptions, more scrap, more rework, more rejections, then that's going to cost you money. So that's going to be something you want to measure. You want to look for price changes that result from volume changes, and those volume changes driven by the customer. So you should not see price changes if your supplier can't ask for a change in volume. But if you ask for a change in volume, either up or down, then you may see a price change, you may not. But you want to look for that. What's driving that? You want to understand, is that temporary, or is that something that the supplier thinks is going to be permanent? That can make a big deal to your profit projections for the year, to your margins, to all of the numbers that you give to Wall Street, and they can also be a big deal to the people in finance, and they need to know that. So then you need to look at things like expedite charges. As we ramp back up in recovery, and as suppliers ramp back up, you don't go from zero to full production in overnight, even in a week. So are there overtime charges? Are there expedite charges? Are suppliers wanting to charge for inventory that they have been hanging on to maybe since March, or had produced in March and April and haven't been able to ship because your company wasn't open? Or are you looking at storage that you've had to hold to your customers? You want to understand what's going on in terms of these costs. So these are things to look for. And then cash flow changes. So suppliers who before were fine with maybe net 30 terms or even net 45 terms now may be experiencing cash flow issues. They may ask for requests to change those payment terms. Now, if you want additional orders, they may be asking for some money up front, a deposit with that order. Can you pay me 25% of the order? I will accept the order when you pay me the 25% and process it. So you want to understand what's happening to your supplier. How is their financial viability? And cash flow changes and cash requests to change payment terms are a big red flag, at least a yellow flag, that you should be checking out and examining to find out the influence and the result of that. Responsiveness, this is how quick suppliers respond to inquiries, how polite they are, how accommodating they are, using an appropriate sense of urgency, a term that I love to use, and it's hard to define just what that means, but that means that when it's an important thing to me as a customer, I want it to be important to you as a supplier. If it's just a run-of-the-mill request, then I want you to treat it as that, not to drop everything and do something because I said, could you look at this, or can I get some more information about this? But when it is when it's an emergency on my part, I want it to be an emergency on the part of my supplier. And then how proactive suppliers are. Typical measures for this are, how long does it take to respond to email or voicemail requests? Usually, if you send a request to a supplier or an inquiry via email or voicemail, you expect to get some kind of acknowledgement back in 24 hours. Hey, I got your message. I don't have an answer, but I'm working on it. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. Or I got your message. This is really tough. Why don't you give me 3 days and I'll get back to you by the end of the week. But you want to have the acknowledgement that they got your request and that it is in queue and it's being worked on. You can also look for responsiveness on corrective action requests, any kind of quality issue, the response time to that. It's different if you say, hey, can you tell me if you have extra material for this, or versus, hey, I got a problem, you're getting a corrective action request because I need this problem fixed. So you want to make sure that, again, this appropriate sense of urgency is applied, but quality issues generally require quick turnaround. For full-blown corrective action requests, I typically want acknowledgement within 24 hours, formal acknowledgement, and I want at least a first pass response in 3 days. So within 72 hours, the supplier should be able to tell you, this is what we've done, this is what we're seeing. If you don't have a solution, that's okay, but you should be able to say, these are the actions we've taken, this is the investigation, this is what we know so far, and we will be giving you further information every few days, once a week, whatever, however the issue is. And one of the big things is containment on that. So if you have quality issues and you give your supplier notification that you have issues, the first thing they need to do is contain that, and they should be able to tell you within 24 hours what they have done to contain that, whether they're going to do a sorting process or they've just pulled everything out of stock, pulled everything out of WIP, whatever they've done for containment. In recovery, we want to look at a few more things. You want to look at those suppliers that are non-responsive, that you're unable to contact, that aren't really getting back to you, not for any inquiry, especially for quality issues. So this is a big red flag. If they're non-responsive, not getting back to you in 24 hours, you need to be very proactive and find out what's going on. You may need to support a temporary or new contact. Your supplier may have Tiger teams of their own. They may have pulled people off to do special things during this time. They may have furloughs, so someone that you're not used to dealing with now is your primary contact. You need to make sure that you are supporting them and that your supplier is supporting them. The rest of the team is supporting this new person so that they don't say, I don't know, I'm new. I don't know, I'm new. I don't know, I'm new. You want them to say, I don't know, but I've got these people working with me. I will get the answer and get back to you. You want to be as transparent in these communication as you can regarding this pandemic. This is a very important time for suppliers and customers, and everyone needs to be transparent in their communication. They need to be clear. They need to be consistent. They need to have the right level of detail and be very responsive so that you know that you're in contact. With so many people still working from home, not having access to their normal infrastructure, all of that, it's very important that you reach out to people. And phones are often better than email during this time because you can actually talk to someone and get the assurance that yes, your request has been heard, your issue has been elevated, whatever the thing is. So reach out to your suppliers, and if they're not reaching out to you. So if they're proactive good suppliers, they should be reaching out to you for status on your orders, updates on your inventory levels, understanding what they need to do to support you. Really good suppliers are reaching out to all of their customers to find out how can we work better together. In recovery, companies may need more time to assess requested changes. If you need to change your forecast considerably between now and the next 3 months, or you're forecasting out as far as the end of the year, you need to give your supplier some time to process those requested changes and see how quickly they can implement. Lead times have doubled in many, many areas. And so what you thought they could do in January may not be what they can do today. So give them time to assess those changes, make sure they give you their response, and then work with them to figure out the best solution for both organizations. You need to worry if your suppliers are not accepting new RFQs, RFPs, RFIs, or your response is significantly different than it was pre-COVID. So they may be overwhelmed, but they at least need to touch base with you and say, I have your request. It's in queue, we're looking at it, we'll get back to you. If they're not accepting that, and I'm seeing that on some responses from people, we're not accepting any new orders, we're not doing this, we're not doing that, then those are red to yellow flags, and you need to find out what's going on and see what that means for your business. Or if your communication isn't consistent, maybe you can talk to them fine this week, everything looks good, but next week when you call, nobody answers, or nobody's getting back to you. You got a good response when you sent the RFQ, They said, yes, we got it, we're going to work on it, and then they go silent. So if you're not getting consistent communication, then you need to follow up on that as well. So that's an area to look at, and that's a way to assess supplier performance. Inventory management, this is not a typical way to manage supplier performance, but we do look at things like just-in-time inventory levels. If you have a just-in-time program, you don't want to run out, and your supplier is supposed to make sure that you don't. If you have finished good inventory that you're supposed to keep for your customers, that's an area to look at, because your production level and your raw material and your WIP may not be able to support the finished good that you have promised to your customers. Then you need to work with your marketing and production people and understand what can be done. Lead times, standard and expedited lead times are always a way to manage or look at inventory. If you have shorter lead times, you typically need less inventory. Longer lead times mean that you typically want to hold more inventory for safety's sake. Maybe it's actual safety stock, and maybe it's just a little bit of a cushion for you because you have volatility in your demand. Perfect order of receipts. So are you receiving things from your suppliers that are exactly the way you ordered them? The right quantity, the right packaging, the right timing of delivery, everything that matches your order exactly. And then the other thing to look at is shortages and stockouts. So if your suppliers have changes in these areas, then you need to look deeper and figure out what's going on. In recovery, suppliers and customers need to know what freight options are available. Maybe you typically ship things on a boat, but you need some parts. Can you get air freight? Is that even possible? Which company could you arrange to get some parts air freighted if you need that? If you need things overnighted, if they're domestic suppliers, who's doing that? How can you make sure that they're picking up and delivering? Look at the shortages, especially if they're telling you they're out and there's no date for when they'll be able to fulfill your order. That is a huge red flag, and you want to look at that. If they're saying, oh, we're out, we can't get it this week, but we're going to have those available the 24th of June or the week of the 22nd of June, which is next week, then it's not so bad. But if you're not getting new delivery dates, or the dates are either TBD, to be determined, or they're in October, then you've got some problems. The other issue to look for is excess inventory. Suppliers may actually be calling you and saying, hey, we've got lots of inventory of this. We'd like to get it off our shelves. Can you take it? If you can take it, that's a good thing to do. That means you have to be able to take the space and utilize your space to take it, and you have to be able to afford that. So you have to look at your company's position, and can you take that excess inventory? If it's product you need, then that's great. If it's product that you need eventually and you don't need it immediately, then you need to work through that with the management, with the finance people, and make sure everyone's on board. This is an area where you need suppliers to be looking at their tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, and they need to be telling you the state of the inventory that is needed for your parts. So if your suppliers are having shortages, then they need to be sharing that with you very, very quickly. They don't need to be covering that up and hiding that and saying, oh, we'll manage that. They need to be sharing that information with you, letting you know about the risks so that collectively you can make a decision on how to move forward. And then the surprises. Always the things that say, uh-oh, we didn't expect that. So what are you not anticipating in terms of inventory that is surprising you? It may be good, but most likely it's going to be, uh-oh, we thought we had plenty of that, or there was plenty of that in the pipeline, and now it's not there. So look for those kinds of things. These are all ways to assess and manage the performance of your suppliers to make sure they're doing what you need to go forward. Flexibility, agility, typical lead times, typical measures, lead time, available inventory. Do they have inventory that they stock? Do they make this product? Is this a build to stock part where they always have some, or they always have some in work and you can continually get some? Raw material support of your forecast. So if this isn't something that they do on a make to stock, but they make to order, do they have sufficient raw material to meet your forecast? Companies right now are typically looking 3 to 6 to 9 months out to say, am I going to be able to meet my forecast? Companies are revising their forecast. They're working with their customers to look at the changes in forecast, the changes in orders, what they need to do. So everybody's in the process of revising. And as you revise, you need to share that with your suppliers, and you need them to acknowledge that they do have ability to meet that revised forecast, or to tell you where the problems are so that you can work collectively to find a resolution to that. So in recovery, if you have insistence from suppliers to ship quantities that you don't need based on a pre-COVID forecast, you need to understand what's going on there. Is it just a space thing that they need? Do they need the cash? Is it both? And then what does that do to your company? If that has a large negative impact on your company, you need to work with your supplier to figure out a mutually beneficial solution, which may be difficult. Shortages, again, if they have shortages from their suppliers, your suppliers need to be letting you know that. And if they are unable to make delivery to you, then you want to know that much sooner than later. In this case, it's much better for a supplier to call and say, hey, there's risk in this. And then guess what? They manage to meet it or get 98% of it, versus thinking, oh, well, we think we've got 90% confidence we can do this, and then not making it. It's much, much better to tell the customer that there's an issue or a potential issue, and then have it resolved before it becomes a real impact. Again, not accepting new orders or change orders or reschedules. Those are red flags. Those need to be escalated. Those need to be worked through, because that's happening all over the world. Significant changes in lead time. Again, companies are experiencing lead time changes of about 200%. So lead times are doubling today from what they were in the January timeframe. So validate your lead times. Make sure you put those lead times into your systems so that you don't continue to churn out MRP schedules with lead times that a supplier can no longer honor. And then look at suppliers who have limited limited communication with their internal partners. Again, many people are working from home. Make sure your counterparts, whoever they are at your supplier, is in touch with their production, their logistics people, that they know what's going on. Oftentimes it's an account manager or a salesperson, and they are working remotely too. Maybe they do that typically, but do they have the communication lines and the frequency of communication they need to be working with their internal partners? So those are things to look for. Assurance of supply. This is the ability of the supplier to keep that nice, smooth flow of supply to meet your demand. That's what we want, this nice, smooth flow of goods through factories that are meeting the customer demands. So typically you're looking for, are they meeting their and honoring their lead times? Are they clearly communicating with you? Are they giving you the availability of finished goods, stock available, giving you status on work in process raw materials for custom goods? And then are they able to accept your orders, review those, and get those fulfilled kind of on a standard basis, because this is someone that you've dealt with for a while. If these are new suppliers, then all of this may be different. But if these are tried and true suppliers, what we're looking for is, can they continue to support you in a business as usual scenario. In recovery, you want to look for, are they changing the visibility? Before, they used to send you a report every week or every month to show you what the available inventory was. If they stop that, find out why. Is it because they don't have the manpower because someone's furloughed, or is it because they don't want you to know how short they are? There's a big difference. If lead time significantly lengthened, like I say, this is common. So understand, is this something that's temporary, or is this something that they expect to continue for the foreseeable future? If they're not communicating, if they're not confirming delivery dates, their communication is sporadic, you've got some problems, you need to look at that, you need to dig into that. Don't just accept that. Those are big yellow and red flags. So in summary, supplier performance will aid and erode the end customer satisfaction, and they will help you get through recovery, or they will keep you from getting back to a successful position. So your suppliers are extensions of your business, and they need to be in the loop, and you need to be working very closely with them. Performance measures track the supplier's ability to execute over time. So you're looking for consistency, you're looking for thoroughness, and you're looking for completeness. Thoroughness is the depth of the performance, how well they address all aspects of their requirement and expectations, and how good they are at updating you on that. Completeness means actually executing, shipping entire orders in one shipment, limiting the partials, making sure the packaging is correct, that the markings are correct, that the documents are all right. So how thorough are they? How complete are they able to execute? The timeliness of the shipments, of the communication, of the response, all of that, and then their quality. So is their quality changing? Is it getting better? Maybe it's getting better, maybe it's not, but make sure you're tracking that. You want to make sure you include your suppliers in setting these metrics. This is a great time to reiterate and emphasize the performance requirements. These are our expectations for suppliers. These are requirements to do business with my company. Make sure you are aligned with your supplier on how you're going to measure, how you're measuring quality, how you're going to assess that supplier so that they don't know. Remember back to that first slide where it says, if you give me, tell me how you're going to measure me. And if you give me weird things, then my behavior is going to reflect that. So make sure that you're clear on that and that you have them taking action and behaving in such that it's going to give you the results you want. Agree on the timing for the feedback, corrective action responses, all of that. If you haven't done that before, it's not a bad time to say, look, we are all in a different situation. We need to set some parameters here. Here's what I'd like. Can you meet these requirements? If they have, this is something they can negotiate. This is something that you can work with them, but make sure that you agree on what those timing responses are so that you can make sure they're following up and following through. Timing is really optimal now for implementing a lot of these things across the supply base. During the last 3 months, you may have added suppliers to your supply base. You may not have had time to really go through and emphasize the expectations, the requirements, talked about how you're going to measure them. If you haven't, then this is a great time to do that. And even if you were able to do that, it's a good time to reiterate that. And even if you've had a supplier for 5 years, this is not a bad time to say, you know what? We're going to do things differently. We recognize we need to do some things differently going forward. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And we're going to measure that. It's not necessarily just throw this out on your supplier. You want to include them in that. You want to make sure that they can do the things you're asking them to do, because if they can't, then you need to find alternate suppliers. So this is an important area. So recovery performance can vary for a lot of reasons. So don't assume things, don't think that you know things, check, validate, ask, make sure you're thorough in this. Attempt to understand the complete picture, not only for your company, but for the supplier. Assess impacts, escalate. If you see a supplier with a lot of red flags, you need to escalate that, make sure that you've got all the stakeholders involved to know what's going on. And you need to really tell the difference, discern between temporary and long-term impacts. This is sometimes a gut feel. This is sometimes reading the tea leaves of what's happening, but it's really important that you differentiate between, oh, this is just a short-term thing, or I don't see them having a way to solve this and get back on track. These are important things for your company to know early on so they can make decisions. So you're looking for minor and major variances, deviations from past performance. You're asking your supplier why. Give me your future, give me your forecast. Tell me what life looks like for you and your company, because we want to be able to compare and make sure we've got this partnership to move forward with. You can let them know that you might have tolerated some poor performance prior to COVID, but you can't accept that. Again, quality things right now are impacting companies much more extensively and much more expensively than they were prior to COVID. Legacy suppliers, new suppliers, everyone appreciates the clarification, the consistency of applying the terms and the expectations and the requirements, and everyone appreciates feedback on performance. Even if it's negative feedback that you're not doing well, it's better than not knowing anything and just leaving things in limbo. Set your improvement goals, collaborate on plans to execute. If you haven't baselined, then now is a great time to set a baseline, track the performance, and feed that back the results consistently. So it's very important to do that. So even though time is of the essence, people forget often how fast you did the job, but they remember how well you did it. So this is an important area. Right now, managing performance for suppliers, you want to do this well. It doesn't matter that you do it quickly, immediately, that you do it tomorrow, but you want to begin doing this and start feeding back that assessment, looking for those signs, and making sure that you do this well. This is a job that's very important for supply chain professionals. It's very important for their suppliers. It's very important for companies to succeed. So don't get caught up in fast, get it off my plate. Make sure you do it thoroughly. So that's what I have for, this says June 16th, but it's going to be June 23rd. Potential risks in supply chain architecture is what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to look at some risks that might be lurking in your supply chain, ways to identify some of those, and talk about some mitigation strategies that you might use to reduce the risk and the subsequent impact from some of that risk. If you're enjoying these, we have this series in July. You can subscribe to that. You can subscribe by month or by quarter. We're going to continue these on a weekly basis, and I hope you're all enjoying those. I get a lot of feedback from people, so I'm enjoying doing those. We're going to keep them going. If you're interested in further discussion, you can do www.callwithjane or just callwithjane.com. This will set up a call with me, and we can talk about how Purple Link can help your business, because there is a better way to reduce cost and risk from your supply chain. We're doing online webinars. We're going to do one on supply chain data analytics that starts the week of July 6th, so just a little over 3 weeks from now. I do CPSM and CPSD. Those are the ISM certifications. I'm both certified and a certified trainer for those. And I will take people signing up. So with that, I've kept it under an hour. If there's comments or questions or whatever, I'm happy to take those. I'm going to stop the recording.